Hello and welcome to Need to Know, your weekly investment podcast brought to you by the experts at Coutts. I'm Sarah Muir and I'm joined as always by Alan Higgins and delighted to welcome Amelie Serrado, who's a director in the President's Office at Christie's for a very special art-themed Need to Know. But before we get to that and before we speak to Amelie, Alan, a few little things to catch up on. And I think this is probably something we're going to go into in a lot more detail probably next week because we're very much focused on art this week. But with thoughts on, we've got Germany, Japan and the UK all in technical recession, yet we're seeing the DAX is at record highs, the Nikkei is at record highs since 1989 or something, S&P is at record highs, they've gone through that 5,000 barrier. What's going on?
Yeah. Hi, Sarah, and welcome, Amelie. I look forward to hearing about art, but just covering the financial markets. A couple of things goes to show that, one, it's all about the United States when it comes to the financial markets. And you make the case of Germany. Germany's been in recession for quite some time. Okay, it's mild. The second point, remember we've spoken before about UK data. That's going to be revised up. UK data has a huge bias to be revised upwards. So that's going to be revised up. Yeah, Japan's super interesting. Actually, I'm going to be talking about sunflowers and Japan in a moment. So I'm not going to talk much about art, but because it's when I started my career, I do actually remember that. So the Nikkei index is not a great index. It's kind of an old-fashioned index. I won't go into detail. So we're still a little bit away on the main index called the Topics. But yeah, look, what can I say? It's simply that equity markets in the long run go up. Absolutely. Yeah. This is one of those times when there are all-time highs. We're overdue a 10% correction because a 10% correction happens, what, Sarah? Every year, right? Every year, as I tell you. So, and then we move on. So, yeah, it's nice to be part of it now, but remember these good times when the times will be bad.
Yeah. Okay. And then just one final bit. One of our regular listeners and somebody we both know very well, Alex, I have to mention this. He sent me an email when we were talking about surfing recently. He did say we'd forgotten to talk about North Devon. How can we forget North Devon? Apparently it's even better than Cornwall.
I still think the Gower Peninsula is right up there. So North Devon, I don't know. We need to get actually a professional surfer on, to basically who's surfed in all the hot spots of the UK and maybe in Europe. Because didn't we have Lillian going on about Biarritz?
Lillian was talking about Biarritz, but also in honor of our guest Amelie today, San Sebastian, which is amazing, and you've got good food as well. So it's a win-win situation in the Basque region.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to say I actually do know some pretty serious surfers, and I'm going to get one on for a couple of minutes just to settle this once and for all.
Definitely. Okay. All right then. So enough of that. Let's get on to the serious business of Need to Know. So just to give you a bit of background, Amelie works very closely with professional advisors and family offices to advise ultra-high net worth collectors on managing their art collections. Recent market shifts have meant an increased focus on either art as an asset within a diversified portfolio or in the context of legacy planning around an established collection. So with that in mind, Amelie, what are the three things we need to know about art as an investment?
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Alan. Thanks for having me. The three things we're going to touch on today. First of all, I want to give you a little bit of context on what's happened over the last 10 years, just because it's been, so active as a market. Then we'll move on and look at, some trends of who was buying back then and what's happening today, because there's, again, lots of shifts happening. And let's then look ahead. Let's see what do we think is going to happen in our little glass bowl.
Perfect. And I'm going to break the rules. I've taken an executive decision. I'm very, very strict with Alan. He's only ever allowed to talk about three subjects. And normally he's even given one subject when we have a guest, but he's just going to have to chip in when he gets a chance. But Amelie, I'm going to let you talk about a fourth thing because you wanted to share sort of best practices in the context of sort of the financial focus on art. So this is the first, I think, for Need to Know, but I think it's going to be worth it. All right, then let's kick off then with the first subject, which is the sort of what's been happening over the last 10 years. And I know when we were talking about this before, when I asked you about art as an investment, you slightly pushed back on that concept, didn't you?
I know, and it's very commonly referred to as artisan investment. But the data actually shows that the main interest, the main driver for collecting remains the passion, the personal interest. Data as fresh as just a month ago suggests that 37% of collectors are still collecting for their own pleasure versus 28% who are collecting for investment.
Okay, because I imagine if you're trying to buy purely for investment without having a particular interest in a period or an artist, it's actually pretty difficult to buy the right thing, isn't it?
The rules are so different there, and I'm not the best person to talk about, the financial markets. But what I can speak and sort of meet you halfway here is to say that the fine art index exceeded this S&P 500 index by 4.2%. It grew, 4.2% between January 2022 and July 2023. And, with inflation spikes shocking the global economy in 2022, art prices actually suffered relatively less than other asset classes. And so it's a really resilient market in times of uncertainty.
Okay. I know Alan's got something to say about sunflowers in a minute, but if we're thinking about, the sort of the real kind of, the sort of headline grabbing auctions that we see, in New York or wherever, it tends to be the old masters that are the most popular, or certainly the category that reaches the highest prices. Is that still the case?
I would say that, yes, the world record remains that of an old master painting, the Leonardo da Vinci. I don't think I need to even give you the title of the painting. Everybody knows it. It's so famous. And that says a lot for the category. But I think most people would probably say that the contemporary art market is now leading in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
It's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, I was going to say with the old class, with the sort of old masters then, and I guess probably perhaps impressionists as well, is that because there's less of that about than there is of contemporary art? I guess that must be the case.
Yes, and for very good reasons. First of all, living artists are still producing, dead artists aren't. And then, of course, so many either things get lost or a lot of it are in museums now. So that in itself reduces the size of the market.
Yeah. Okay. And also, I've looked on your website. Obviously, I've looked at the Christie's website, and what you are seeing perhaps more of now. I'd like to get your thoughts on this. Is the rise of luxury alongside art? I know Alan and I have talked about Birkins as a store of wealth and diamonds and things like that. That's a real growth area, isn't it, for collectors?
Oh, it's been huge. And we see this. When we speak about luxury, we talk at Christie's about wine, watches, jewelry, and handbags. But cars have also become an increasingly collectible area. And they're actually challenging the contemporary market in itself. And we've seen, in the last 10 years that it's grown about 6%.
Is that presumably then because it's got a slightly sort of lower sort of price threshold, so it's a little bit easier perhaps for younger collectors to get involved?
It's a good entry point. But also, I think as a culture, it's also become more pervasive. It's more accessible. There's so many luxury brands out there. And because so many of these luxury brands, such as Hermès, make a real point about limiting what's on offer in the primary market, therefore the secondary market becomes all the more valuable.
Okay. So it's still the classics at the moment that are kind of leading from a price point of view, but we're seeing perhaps from a volume point of view, we're seeing an increase in sort of interest in what you call luxury and photography and sort of jewelry, watches, cars, leather goods, that sort of thing.
And design is a category that's grown a lot in the last 10 years that you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago to the same extent. Essentially, what I would say is it is normal for every generation to collect the artists of their own time, and hence the prevalence of the contemporary market. However, masterpieces, because of their rarity, because of the fact that they're not being no more are being produced, maintain those top level prices.
Yeah. Is it also the case then, because I was looking through your notes before, is it also the case then that perhaps the ability to prove the authenticity of a work is better now perhaps than it was historically, and so maybe has that kind of shrunk the available sort of market for some of these sort of rarer pieces because it's easier now to say this is a Da Vinci or this is a Monet or whatever. Is that the case? Do you think that's fair to say?
I think there's more transparency today. If you look at, there are more databases available on pricing. ArtNet is a fantastic resource that's now available to any, collector, whether they're budding or established. And that allows people to, understand where has the work come from, and is there, more importantly, a gap in that history? And if there's a gap, that's much harder to hide now, and more questions are being asked.
Okay, all right then. So that's where we've been over the last 10 years. So let's talk a little bit then about, you want to talk about how the market's changed. Who's buying art now? Now, I know, Alan, do you want to jump in here? Because you were talking about, right at the start of your career, the sale of that famous painting of some sunflowers.
Well, going back to Japan, the Japan boom of the 1980s, and Amelie, the Japanese were the big buyers of the 1980s and went into the 1990s. And I remember... because we were, it became a financial asset when a Japanese life insurance company bought Sunflowers by Van Gogh. That's the right way of pronouncing it, isn't it? You can tell this is not my strong area. $40 million. $40 million. Now, so I've seen a fair bit of research on and read a fair bit of research ahead of this, and art has compounded quite nicely. I think you're quite right. Shouldn't just be an investment. But I've got to stick up for global equities, I'm afraid. And this is maybe a crude example, but I'm guessing, what would Sunflowers go for today? 200 million? God knows. No one knows. But they're the best paintings of the world. What would you say? 200, 250? No one really knows. And that sounds impressive, 5-6 times. But actually, do you know what the global stocks have done since 87? When I started my career, and this includes a big Japanese weighting, 14 times your money. So, it does go to show that it's hard to beat global equities. Looking at reading the research, there's been no doubt that art has been a good, uncorrelated, interesting investment. But actually, interestingly, unlike in stocks where if you buy the best of the best, the Microsofts, the Apples, you've done well. It looks like, and this is just one example, but generally looking at compounding, people who've paid up for these real, amazing pieces, the most expensive iconic pieces, probably haven't done as well. And there's a bit of work from Mai and Moses that basically shows even 10% compound, but much less for the absolute masters. But are we seeing the other Japanese back, Amelie, in the market?
I think they were most active back in the 80s and 90s. But what you say here, that is exactly why we don't talk about art as an investment. Of course, you can make a profit from it. But what I think is the main thing here is that those sunflowers will bring joy. And to what extent have your equities brought you the same amount of joy?
Company. To the employees of a Japanese life insurance company. It is bizarre.
So no, I mean, what we see is, every decade there's a shift, historically, in terms of where there's been an influx of majority. We've seen the Russians, we've seen then the Middle East and Asia most recently. But in the last 2 years, I would say the USA have really been on top. They've got incredible collections that are hitting the market. Thinking of the Paul Allen collection, which was absolutely fantastic. I mean, the absolute best of the best there. And it makes sense. They have the largest number of billionaires globally. They have 37% of billionaires are from the US versus China, 28%. And so that you see that correlation come through in the art market. But today, I think there's less of that geographical focus. I think what I think are the more interesting trends today is that we're seeing that whereas historically it was mostly men who were collecting, in the last 3 years, we have actually seen an increase of activity by women collectors. Now, the overall data still shows that men are the greatest collectors because they will probably spend the most on the big ticket items. But if you look at the median, women are catching up extremely quickly. And that's quite exciting because it will change in itself the way people collect, what they collect. And you see that through the emergence of women artists being shown and having major retrospectives in museums.
that also, without wanting to sort of stereotype, is that also then linked to that rise in luxury as well? Is that women buyers buying luxury goods, or is that split between men and women?
I think it's split between men and women. I don't think you see that as clearly because men have often traditionally been buying jewelry for women, and in those luxury categories, cars and wine are still mostly bought by men. I don't think you can cut it as clearly as that in that category. But then moving from the gender, looking at the generation, the baby boomers remain the highest participants, probably because they've got the deepest pockets, but they're also approaching a later stage in their lives where they'll be less active. And we're seeing that the Gen X and millennials are very, very quickly catching up. And we will, it explains why 80% of the bids that Christie's has received were actually placed digitally. That's been a huge difference. It used to be all done in person or on the phone.
How much was that impacted by COVID, where presumably sort of auctions went online? And is it a carry on from that, or was it something that you already saw pre-COVID?
We already saw it pre-COVID, and we'd started building into our strategy online sales. And thank God, because it just meant that we were that much more resilient when COVID hit. We then saw a spike for obvious reasons during COVID. But, even though it's reduced a little bit because there's no, seeing a painting in person and enjoying the theater of a live auction will always be an appeal to some people. There is no denying it's, the next generation wants to bid online.
Okay. So just to summarize then, we're looking at the moment then, we're seeing probably the USA is a big market because it has the largest number of billionaires of any country in the world. So that kind of makes sense. But we're seeing perhaps more women coming in as buyers now, and we're starting to see a little bit of a generational shift. So boomers are still the buyers of the big ticket items, but we're seeing sort of Gen X and millennials are catching up with that. So that's sort of giving us a little bit of a taste of how the market's changed. So what's the outlook then for the future, for the next sort of decade or so?
I think the biggest trend that we're going to see is that in the next 6 years, we're going to witness the largest wealth transfer ever seen. We're expecting an $18.3 trillion to shift from one generation to another. And this is going to pose a lot of challenges as well as opportunities.
In what you talk about sort of challenges, what are the challenges going to be then?
I think the main challenge is that children aren't necessarily going to want to buy what their parents are selling. So you're going to have a supply in the market that's not necessarily going to be matched with the demand.
So are we talking then potentially more old masters coming onto the market, more impressionist paintings coming onto the market again?
Certainly impressionist works of art, yes.
And what about the opportunities?
Well, I was just going to jump in.
I
think you were saying about millennials. I mean, what about the NFT market? Has that died a death, or is the younger generation certainly very engaged in that still?
Look, it peaked, and Christie's played a really important, pivotal role in this by selling Beeple's artwork for about $65 million. But it's since there's a correction happening in the market, we still sell NFTs. We believe in the market. And I think that whenever you see a certain, such a dramatic skew in one direction, it's just healthy for it to take a moment to recalibrate the market, and create that ecosystem around every category, which is the art critics, the collectors, the artists themselves, the buyers, the sellers. You need to find that right balance. And I would say long-term NFTs will be around. Will they go back to what we saw a few years ago? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. And what about this sort of trend? I'd like to get your thoughts on this, where there's been some discussion about, if you've got a really, really important piece, whether it goes to auction or whether it goes directly sort of to a private sale. I noticed on the Christie's website, you've got already artwork that's directly available for private sale. It doesn't go to auction. You can just go online, request the price and buy it. Is that something we're starting to see a little bit more of in the art world?
Well, I think that it's in our DNA to find the best possible bespoke solution for our clients. And it's really on a case by case basis. Do they want confidentiality and privacy? Then, the private sale channel is then perhaps more suitable to them. But ultimately, the magic that's created by at least two bidders on the same painting can be transformational for a seller. And so I think we weigh up all of those different things, and there's no standard answer.
And I know
that's
also
the beauty of what we do.
And I know also, I mean, and quite rightly, you did sort of push back against the concept of art as an investment primarily. But I saw something advertised the other day, and I now the name of it escapes me, but it was sort of a stock market. I think the idea was that you could sort of buy into a syndicate in a very expensive painting, like whether it was a Freud or a Bacon, I can't remember which. But I guess the idea then is that you can invest in a Freud painting, which you could never afford to own outright. But I wonder, I mean, that really is purely investment, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, the fractionalization of art is there are lots of different models out there. If I wanted to buy, a bit of a painting, call me old fashioned, I just still really like a postcard.
or a sketch if I've got the money.
Yeah, exactly. No, but prints is a great way of going into that. If you really, if you don't have the money, look at alternative categories. Prints is fantastic for that reason. And there's so much skill put into an artist doing prints. And that's why so many artists like Picasso, like Hockney, like Warhol, they all did prints. There's real value attached to it.
And also, I know, because when we were chatting before, we talked about, if younger sort of collectors that want to buy old masters, they can't afford an old master, but they could afford maybe an old master sketch or a drawing or something like that. And that's, again, it's another way of buying into that work without the sort of huge outlay of buying an actual painting.
Absolutely. And this is part of the opportunities that you were alluding to earlier, Sarah, which is that, so much of the media headlines are dominated by these, phenomenal art prices, and which can be intimidating for a young collector that's just starting out. But actually, there are so many categories out there that do not fall into that, into the high price band. And old master drawings, we're seeing a huge resurgence among young collectors, in their 20s and in their 30s, who see that it ticks many boxes. It is, they're no longer any more made. They are rare, and with the right research, you can really feel safe buying one. And they're so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that point. Okay, I did say at the beginning, and we normally only have 3 things, but I'm going to let you have 4 things, because you had some very good points you wanted to make about this sort of wider discussion. I mean, we all need to know, we do talk about investment, about, the financial focus on art, and thoughts on the financial side of art. You had a couple of things to say about that.
I do. And I'm the first one to say that we don't believe in art as an investment, but I appreciate that a lot of people do think of it in that context, and there's a slight distinction between the two. If you do think of it in that context, think of it long term. The traditional collecting cycle has always been 20 to 25 years to build a collection, then you hold it, and then another 20 years later, you start selling it, or your children sell it. I think that's still true today. That's where we see the strongest results. And when I speak to family offices about how they can incorporate collecting for the next generation, because when they're talking to their grandchildren about the collection that they own, it's so important that they understand what the art and culture. And so we start collecting for them at that young age. And that actually brings on to the second one, which is that if you have that asset that you've built over the course of the first 21st years of an individual's life, they then have something that they can borrow and lend against. So you've got the art lending market for that reason has reached $29 billion at the end of 2023. That's 11% up from the year before. So it's an increasingly common tool to leverage their collection to buy more art. or fund other parts of their investments. And then the last thing I would say in terms of looking at art as an investment is philanthropic. If you've invested and you've bought a beautiful painting, and you want to create raise money for a foundation or a charity that you're close to, you can actually, if you add that philanthropic angle to it, when you bring the work of art to sale, you can really maximize your returns. So the best example is two Tracey Emin paintings that were from the same series, same size. One sold for charity, the other one didn't. The one who sold for charity 3 months earlier sold for 25% more than the other one that didn't. That makes a big difference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then I think finally, ultimately, all of this considering, buy what you love, because if you lose the money, it just won't hurt as bad, and you'll still have joy attached to it. That the joy is the ultimate reward.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Alan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, not really. We had James Butterfield. I say not really. There's always something, isn't there? Do you remember, Sarah, we had James Butterfield on?
I do.
Crypto,
talking about Bitcoin.
And the one thing he said to me, and I'd be interested to what you think, Amelie, because I pushed him a bit and I said, well, isn't Bitcoin a belief system? And that he actually said art is a belief system, which is quite thought-provoking in the sense that, go back to sunflowers selling for 40 million, it's the belief that it's quite philosophical, the belief that it was worth 40 million way back in 1987. Do you ever get any pushback and just in terms of a concern? Because obviously we have seen the NFT, which is market, which was the ultimate belief system, absolutely collapse, and interestingly not come back with crypto. Have you got any concerns that art could be considered a belief system that could dissipate quite quickly, like NFTs have?
I like what you say about the belief system, because ultimately when somebody asks me, well, how can you justify that price on a painting, $500 million on a Leonardo da Vinci? Well, somebody believes that it's worth that much. The price is justified by however much someone is willing to pay for it on that specific day and time. Is the whole art market going to collapse the way NFTs did? I don't see any indication that it will. It's been incredibly resilient through every single crisis in the past. It's and because it's a passion asset ultimately more than anything, I think it's here to stay.
No, I do agree, and I have some those listeners who've when we've done our videos at Coutts has seen my home with all its modern art in it. So I'm a passionate collector as well. I'm pretty sure I've lost money on it, but you never know, right? But I love it. It settles the mind.
It does.
Yeah. And
it does.
I think that's a very good point. It's the joy, as you say, Amelie, so beautifully. It's the joy that's the ultimate reward. We're not buying art as an investment. If you get an investment, that's a sort of bonus. But it is the joy of having a beautiful object hanging on your wall or on your bookshelf or whatever it might be. Thank you very much. A reminder that the views expressed in this podcast are not intended to constitute investment advice, are accurate at the time of recording, and are subject to change. Thank you very much, Alan and Amelie Serrado of Christie's. Thank you for listening and for your comments, suggestions and feedback. It's all very welcome. We'll be back next week with more Need to Know. Until then, bye for now.